This video is about the judicial system here in the United States. Every society needs to have an established method for resolving disputes. Otherwise, nothing gets resolved. There are 52 different judicial systems in the United States. There is one at the federal level, and there's one at the state level, each state level. So there's 50 federal courts in every state, one in every state, plus the District of Columbia. And there are 50 state judicial systems plus the District of Columbia. And of course, there is the primary court, the Supreme Court of the land, according to the Constitution, and that is the United States Supreme Court. I want to make a point right here is that the state and federal court systems are independent of each other, meaning the federal court system is not superior to the state system. They are separate bodies of the judicial system, and a case could potentially be pending in both the federal court and the state court based out of the same set of circumstances. You see that not often, but you can see that primarily in criminal law versus a business law situation. For example, somebody is caught trafficking drugs between the United States and Canada. They can be prosecuted at the federal level for the transaction or the transporting from out of the country into our country. But let's say they were caught in New York State. The state prosecutors can prosecute for the possession of the drugs in the state. So in that instance, there could be a case federally prosecuted and state prosecuted based on the same circumstances. I want to talk about the concept of jurisdiction. This is extremely important. Before a case can get to court, the question always is, well, which court? Which court am I going to? And it's very important to make sure you pick the right court, or i.e. the court that can hear it. Jurisdiction. This jurisdiction, this idea, this concept of jurisdiction is the court's authority to hear and decide and make decisions regarding a particular case. This authority or jurisdiction is granted by the Constitution or in the legislative body. Legislators have defined that in statutes as to which court has authority to hear a certain case and which ones can't. And knowing which court has the authority to hear a certain type of case, as I said, is important because choosing the wrong one can result in a case being dismissed and then losing potentially. So let's talk about types of courts. We have specialty courts. We call those courts of limited jurisdiction, meaning they can only hear one type of case. Family court, for instance. They can only hear family court cases, and there's a list of them. They can hear custody, they can hear child support cases, they can hear neglect cases, juvenile delinquency type cases. Tax court will only hear cases involving tax issues. Bankruptcy court is only hearing bankruptcy issues. So specialty courts. Then we have this idea of courts of having general jurisdiction, meaning they can hear any kind of case. Any kind of case can go to a court that has general jurisdiction. These general jurisdiction courts and the specialty courts are courts we say have original jurisdiction. Original jurisdiction means this is the first court that's going to hear a case. They have the authority to hear and decide a case when it is first presented. And then we have courts with only appellate jurisdiction, meaning they only review cases that have happened in other courts. So this is our concept of jurisdiction. So how do we decide which court has original jurisdiction? Because if somebody is going to bring a case against somebody, it has to start somewhere. So what is that first court, that first original jurisdiction court? So how do we decide which court has the original jurisdiction? In persona jurisdiction, if you're within the bounds. person that is within the bounds of the court. And I'm going to explain that in a second. And the other is in rem jurisdiction. The actual property is within the bounds of the court. So let's take these two. In rem, when I say property, that could be real estate, land, and that's generally what it refers to. But in some instances, it could be the personal property is being held somewhere. Maybe a vehicle was being fixed. Somebody was on vacation. A Vermonter was on vacation in the Adirondacks here in New York, and the vehicle broke down and is being fixed here in New York. And for the sake of my example, the person who is fixing it won't return the car back to the person from Vermont. Well, since the car is here, the person may not be from New York, they're from Vermont, but their car is here. So any court in New York would be okay to bring their case in because the property is here. If the land located here, people could, someone could be, this happens often, you can have a real estate transaction for a piece of land in the Adirondacks, and the buyer is from out of state and the seller is from Canada. So if there's an issue, the question is, well, what court do we go to? Well, you're going to go to the court where the property is located. Same thing with persona. In persona, the person is in the boundaries. So a court in New York may and will have jurisdiction over people. We can even say there's a Canadian citizen down here shopping for the day in Plattsburgh, New York, and a Vermonter over here in, visiting family and friends, and they get into a car accident. The question is, and if it has to go to court, which court has original jurisdiction? Well, both these people are not from New York, but this incident occurred in New York, and they're both in New York when it happens. So if you're in bounds, this is a very simplistic discussion over original jurisdiction, but generally that's how it works. If you're in the bounds, if you're in the state, you can be sued within that state. If the property is within that state, it can be sued within that state. Now I'm going to explain when we talk about courts what particular jurisdictions jurisdiction the federal court has and the state courts have. But that's the general overview. So now let's step into a couple little sticky areas about jurisdiction. We have this concept called long-arm statute jurisdiction. This is for businesses, folks who are doing business within the boundaries. Their main business might not be here, their corporate office might not be here, but they're doing business here. So the idea is that a court has jurisdiction over that person if the activities took place within a state. The key is that the person, i.e. the defendant, the one who's going to be sued, must have enough of a connection with the state for the court to have power over that person. And we call this the minimum contacts test. Maybe that business advertises or sells their product here. Transaction took place here. There's an ongoing business relationship here. If something happens with a particular, let's say, product, and actually that's my next example, so let me jump over. So here's an example. Allison, a Texas resident, is injured when the PowerFlex exercise machine she's using collapses. Allison files a lawsuit against PowerFlex in a Texas court, which is headquarters in Chicago. The question is, does Texas have proper jurisdiction? And that is going to depend on the minimum contacts test that we just looked at. Well, they're doing business in Texas. Maybe this was an infomercial. She saw it on TV and she ordered it up, and she has, a 30-day money-back guarantee. But anyway, within that time frame, or even 60 days after the machine collapses on her, the machine's broken. Maybe it's a products liability issue. And Texas doesn't have an office. PowerFlex doesn't have an office in Texas. Their headquarters in Chicago. The question is, can she sue in Texas? And she's going to try, and she's going to file her lawsuit. And PowerFlex is going to come to court and say, you don't have jurisdiction over me. And the court is going to say, well, you advertise here in Texas. You're taking business from Texas residents. Maybe there'll be information about other PowerFlexes that were sold in the state of Texas. So there appears to be some sort of relationship. And that's how a court will determine whether or not they will get an outside resident or corporation within the bounds of their state for jurisdiction. We call it the long arm statute. As you can see, this can get a little sticky. So where else can it get sticky? Cyberspace, right? What happens if you want to sue someone or a business that strictly operates on the internet? This is extreme. This has been litigated quite often, as you can imagine, because a lot of people are doing business on the internet, and not a lot of places actually have a business. They don't have a store that you can go into. Even in some other state, it's primarily done on the internet. And the question that has been asked is, does the business or individual do substantial business within the boundaries of a particular state? I believe this is growing. This is going to get to be a case where they're going to use this test, but what seems to be happening, you know what, I'm going to just circle it here with my little, this here, terms of use. A lot of online businesses have a terms of use. You've probably just clicked on them without even reading them. You should check out Amazon.com's. There's a terms of use. If you buy products or if you want to sue Amazon, it will say you are agreeing. If anything comes up or if you want to sue Amazon, it's going to say right in the terms of use where jurisdiction will lie and where you can sue that particular business. So, don't mean to frighten anybody by any means, but I tend to, when I'm shopping online, and it is not a big business. I mean, let's say you can buy something online from Walmart, but Walmart has a store just about everywhere, including Plattsburgh, New York. So if something happens, or if there was a need to bring an action against Walmart, they do substantial business within the boundaries. That one's a no-brainer. But sometimes you come across some businesses online that aren't like Walmart or Target or Amazon or some bigger companies, and you want to do business with them. I personally always look to the About Me section and find out where they're located, and if there is no information about where they're located or their corporate office, and that stuff's very hard to find on some websites, I will not do business, because in my personal opinion is I believe that they might be avoiding jurisdiction, or it might be a company that's out of the country, which makes it 1,000 times harder to get this idea of jurisdiction. But I'm getting off track here. Just note that jurisdiction in cyberspace, a lot of courts are dealing with now, and it's very wishy-washy. And most of them are looking to the terms of use and what are people agreeing to when they use that particular business. So be on the lookout for that. So next video, we're going to talk about trial courts versus appellate courts.